Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on a tribute to His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha. Dear friends, we're picking back up on Hassan Baliuzi's immortal work, Abdu'l-Baha, the Center of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah. We are on Chapter 9, Liberty at Last. The very first act of Abdu'l-Baha, on hearing that he was free, was to visit the shrine of his father. During the years of his renewed incarceration, tribulations, diverse in character, had weighed heavily upon him, and of them all the hardest to bear was separation from that beloved and sacred spot. How often did he tell the pilgrims, longingly and wistfully, that there was nothing he desired more than liberty to visit the shrine of Baha'u'llah, that he was a prisoner and denied that freedom, that he would ask them to deputize for him. No sooner was he free to visit Bahji than he resumed the task which he had so diligently pursued in days past. Since the time he had planned and created a garden adjacent to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, he had personally, week after week, fetched jars of water for that garden. Now again, every Friday and Sunday, even when notables and officials were visiting him, he would unfailingly carry water as many as 60 times. But now he was 65 years old, and his health had been taxed to the utmost by the hardships which he had endured. The physical exertion to which he was subjecting himself brought about fresh bouts of illness. Baha'is resident and pilgrim became anxious and begged Abdu'l-Baha to spare himself the task of carrying water and to permit others to deputize for him. He acceded to their request, but so sad did he look that the Baha'is regretted having made this plea to him. A fortnight later, Abdu'l-Baha called them together. He had complied with their wishes, he said, but that particular service had always brought him great joy and peace of heart. Would they now, he asked them, permit him to take it up once again? He wished them to reply exactly as their consciences dictated. How could they, this group of devoted men, refuse him their consent, seeing so evidently what happiness would be his? During the period immediately following the change of the Turkish regime, Abdu'l-Baha continued his residence in Akka. But after the entombment of the remains of the Bab, he chose to live in Haifa, where a house was being built for him. Soon a time came when he ceased to set foot within the city gates of Akka. He had been 24 years when led a prisoner into its citadel, 65 years of age when finally liberated from the shackles of that town. The shrine of the Bab was now a place of pilgrimage. A Baha'i of Ishqabad, Agha Mirza Jafara Hadiyaf, originally a native of Shiraz, to whom Abdu'l-Baha gave the surname Rahmani, was moved to offer to defray the expense of building a pilgrim house in the close vicinity of the shrine. It was on the balcony of this pilgrim house, overlooking the town of Haifa, the bay and the plain of Akka beyond, that Abdu'l-Baha stood soon after its completion and spoke of the vision he had of the future of Mount Carmel and the bay, of the two towns stretched out before his gaze. Behind him stood Mirza Mahmud Zarghani, his secretary during his tour of the Western world, and the diarist of that tour. Did Mirza Mahmud see this splendorous scene, he asked. Poor Mirza Mahmud could see nothing but a puny town below, which was Haifa, an almost deserted port that had no harbor facilities, a bare waste of desert and sand round the arc of the bay, in the distance a walled, circumscribed Akka, dimly discernible. But Abdu'l-Baha could see the two towns joined round the bay, a fine harbor teeming with the ships of all nations. Carmel bathed in light at nightfall, shining like a jewel, great institutions serving the needs and the aspirations of the human race. He saw the world metropolis of the future, sited in a land holy since the days of Abraham. Haji Mirza Haidar Ali writes in the Behjatul Sudur of the hopes of the Baha'is that as the heir to Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha would, with the passage of years, come to resemble him physically as well, but their hopes did not materialize because sorrows and tribulations pressed hard upon Abdu'l-Baha. Afflictions weakened his frame and made him a prey to a number of ailments. He goes on to say that Abdu'l-Baha, in order to protect his followers from worry and anxiety, would not expose them to the knowledge of his maladies, which at times were severe. However, physicians advised him that he ought to seek a change of air and leave the Holy Land. But subsequent events demonstrated the fact that Abdu'l-Baha, when he did this, was not just embarking on a journey to improve his health in a different setting or to prevent its further deterioration. He was indeed taking the first step to reach the world of the West and deliver in person the message of his father. There was another purpose evident in Abdu'l-Baha's journey. Mirza Muhammad Ali and his partisans were now thoroughly discredited. In the absence of Abdu'l-Baha from the Holy Land, the violators would have the field entirely to themselves. But their utter inability to make any move to impair the unity of the Baha'is would set the final seal on their downfall. Abdu'l-Baha particularly stressed this fact in a tablet addressed at the time to a Baha'i of Iskandarun, Alexandretta. The Baha'i News of the Baha'is of the United States, which had begun its life on March 21st, 1910, carried in its 12th number of October 16th, 1910, a portion of a letter written to Isabella Brittingham from Haifa. It was dated August 29th and read in part, I have a very big piece of news to tell you. Abdu'l-Baha has left this holy spot for the first time in 42 years and has gone to Egypt. Think of the vast significance and importance of this step. By it, many prophecies of the sacred scriptures are fulfilled. Everyone was astounded to hear of Abdu'l-Baha's departure, for no one knew until the very last minute that he had any idea of leaving. The afternoon of the day he left, he came to Mirza Asadullah, his home, to see us and sat with us a while beside a new well that has just been finished, and said that he had come to taste the water. We did not realize that it was a goodbye visit. Then he took a carriage and went up the hill to the holy tomb of the Bab. That night, as usual, the believers gathered before the house of Abdu'l-Baha to receive that blessing, which every day is ours, of being in his presence. But we waited in vain, for one of the son-in-laws came and told us that Abdu'l-Baha had taken the Khedivil steamer to Port Said. The 15th number of the Baha'i News, dated December 12, 1910, carried a further letter about Abdu'l-Baha's journey to Egypt. It was written by Sayyid Asadullah Qumi, who was to be Abdu'l-Baha's attendant during his travels. He said, You have asked for an account of Abdu'l-Baha's departure to the land of Egypt. Abdu'l-Baha did not inform anyone that he was going to leave Haifa. The day he left, he visited the holy tomb of the Bab on Mount Carmel. And when he came down from the mountain of the Lord, he went direct to the steamer. This was the first anyone knew about the matter. Within 2 days, he summoned to his presence Mirza Nuruddin, Shoghi Effendi, Khusru, and this servant, the only persons who accompanied Abdu'l-Baha to Egypt were Mirza Munir Zain and Abdul Hussein, one of the pilgrims who was leaving at that time. When Mirza Nuruddin arrived in Port Said, his brother Mirza Munir returned to Haifa. For nearly 1 month, Abdu'l-Baha remained in Port Said, and the friends of God came from Cairo in turn to visit him. One day he called me to accompany him when taking a walk in the streets of the city. He said, Do you realize now the meaning of my statement when I was telling the friends that there was a wisdom in my indisposition? I answered, Yes, I do remember very well. He continued, Well, the wisdom was that I must always move according to the requirements of the cause. Whatever the cause requires for its promulgation, I will not delay in its accomplishment for 1 moment. Now the cause did require that I travel to these parts, and had I divulged my intention at that time, many difficulties would have arisen. Meanwhile, Mirza Muhammad Ali was busy spreading strange rumors. He told the Metropolitan of Akka a cleric in league with him, that Abdu'l-Baha had fled the Holy Land. The Metropolitan telegraphed one of his own men in Jaffa and instructed him to find out whether or not Abdu'l-Baha was on his way to Egypt. That man boarded the Khedivil steamer and came face to face with Abdu'l-Baha. He had the temerity to ask him to affirm his identity. Ashore, the Metropolitan's man sent this telegram: "The said person is aboard." The same thing happened in Port Said. A man came on behalf of the Metropolitan of Akka to make certain that Abdu'l-Baha was there. After a month's stay in Port Said, Abdu'l-Baha once again took ship without previous intimation. He intended to go to Europe, but it became evident that the state of his health did not permit the strenuous work involved. He landed in Alexandria. It was in that ancient city that a sudden change occurred. Journalists in Egypt who had hitherto shown open hostility asked to meet Abdu'l-Baha and perceptibly changed their tone. Even more, they wrote in terms of high praise. Sheikh Ali Youssef, the editor of the Arabic paper Al-Moyad, had previously made harsh attacks on Baha'is and the Baha'i faith, urging severe countermeasures against them. He visited Abdu'l-Baha, and in the October 16th issue of his paper, he published an article under the heading Al-Mirza Abbas Effendi. These are the opening lines of that remarkable article. His Eminence Mirza Abbas Effendi, the learned and erudite head of the Baha'is in Akka and the center of authority for Baha'is throughout the world, has reached the shores of Alexandria. At first, related the writer, Abdu'l-Baha stayed in the Victoria Hotel, but after a few days moved to a rented house. Then he went on to say, "He is a venerable person, dignified, possessed of profound knowledge, deeply versed in theology, master of the history of Islam and of its denominations and developments. Whosoever has consorted with him has seen in him a man exceedingly well informed, whose speech is captivating, who attracts minds and souls dedicated to belief in the oneness of mankind. His teaching and guidance revolve round the axis of relinquishing prejudices, religious, racial, patriotic." Another notable example of that change of attitude was afforded by the Persian weekly Shihra Nima. Its editor, Mirza Abdullah Muhammad Irani, the Mu'addab Sultan, had in the past, in common with many of his countrymen resident in Egypt, displayed feelings far from friendly. Now he reported Abdu'l-Baha's travels with respect and admiration. Even that antagonist of old, Dr. Mirza Muhammad Mehdi Khan, the Zaimul-Dawla, visited Abdu'l-Baha several times and was not lacking in reverence. Abdu'l-Baha's sojourn in Alexandria coincided with the Muslim lunar month of Muharram. This is the month that witnessed the martyrdom of Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, and the third apostolic imam of his faith, together with many others of the house of the Prophet. That tragedy occurred on the 10th day of Muharram 61 AH, which corresponded to October 10th AD 680. The Shia world has mourned his martyrdom ever since. Throughout the month of Muharram and the succeeding month of Safar, wherever Shias are, their grief is given some form of expression. They arrange gatherings at which the sufferings and the heroism of the family, the house of Muhammad, the treachery and the brutality of the foe are recited. Persians of Alexandria invited Abdu'l-Baha to their meeting. He went and was received with every mark of respect. He gave a robe to the reciter of the heart-rending story of Karbala, rewarding him richly for his talent and devotion. He also left money with the hosts to hold a commemorative meeting on his behalf and to feed the poor. An English admirer, Wellesley Tudor Pole, visited Abdu'l-Baha in the autumn of that year. His letter reporting his visit appeared in the Baha'i News of February 7th, 1911. He wrote, "You may be interested in hearing of my recent visit to Abdu'l-Baha at Ramleh, near Alexandria. I spent 9 days at Alexandria and Cairo during the second half of November 1910. Abdu'l-Baha's health had very greatly improved since his arrival from Port Said. He was looking strong and vigorous in every way. He spoke much of the work in America, to which he undoubtedly is giving considerable thought. He also spoke a good deal about the work that is going forward in different European centers, as well as London, and he expects great things from England during the coming year. A Baha'i paper is to be read at the Universal Races Congress in London next July." Abdu'l-Baha had been asked to address the Universal Races Congress, but he decided to defer his departure from Egypt. Early in May, he moved to Cairo and took residence nearby in Zaytun. As Abdu'l-Baha's sojourn in Egypt lengthened, newspapers showed increasing admiration and friendliness. Al-Maqatam, the most prominent of them, had on November 28th of the preceding year, 1910, published a highly appreciative account. Other papers such as Al-Ahram and Wadi an-Nil were no less laudatory. In Cairo, Sheikh Mohammed Baqat, the Mufti of Egypt, and Sheikh Muhammad Rashad, the Khediv's Imam, called on Abdu'l-Baha, and he returned their call. On a Friday, he visited the shrine of Sayyida Zainab and said the Friday prayer there. The Khedive Abbas Hilmi II also met Abdu'l-Baha, and Usman Pasha, the notable responsible for arrangements, later attested to the particular reverence of which the Khedive had exhibited towards him. Their meeting was repeated. Ronald Storrs, original secretary of the British Agency, had first come to know Abdu'l-Baha in 1909. Within the prison city of Akka, and now in Egypt, in his own words, had the honor of presenting him to Lord Kitchener, who was deeply impressed by his personality, as who could fail to be. George Zaidan, the eminent writer and celebrated editor of the magazine Al-Hilal, was another leading figure in the public life of Egypt, who visited Abdu'l-Baha. Indeed, they were many clerics, aristocrats, administrators, parliamentarians, men of letters, journalists and publicists, Arabs, Turks and Persians, who sought his presence. The poor and the deprived also had access to him and went away happy. His personal triumph resounding in Egypt, Abdu'l-Baha turned his attention to Europe. On August 11th, 1911, he boarded SS Corsica bound for Marseille.